The stars had always watched humanity, and in the year 2247, humanity finally watched back for 2 centuries. The people of Earth had kept their silence, building their civilization in the quiet corners of the Sol system while the galaxy burned with conquest and empire. And they had learned the oldest lesson that their violent history had taught them: speak softly, but never forget how to fight. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood at the observation deck of the United Terran Command, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the approaching alien vessel, and her jaw tightened as she studied its massive form, cutting through the void like a blade through water. "They call themselves the Valori Dominion," said Commander Chum beside her, his voice steady but his hands betraying a slight tremor as he held the data tablet. "They have conquered over 10,000 worlds in the last 50,000 years, and no species has ever successfully resisted them." Elena did not respond immediately, and instead she turned to look at the gathered officers and diplomats who filled the war room behind her, their faces painted with fear and uncertainty, and something else that she recognized all too well: the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, the aliens came in peace. She knew better. The Valori ship entered Earth orbit 3 hours later, and its shadow fell across the cities of humanity like a promise of darkness to come. And when the alien delegation transported down to the meeting hall in Geneva, the world held its breath. Ambassador Kethril stood 7 feet tall, his body covered in chitinous armor that gleamed like polished obsidian, and his 4 eyes swept across the human delegation with the cold assessment of a predator examining prey. And when he spoke, his voice resonated through the translator device with mechanical precision. "We are the Valori Dominion," he declared, his mandibles clicking between words. "We have watched your species crawl from the mud of your birth world, and we have decided that you possess enough value to be useful, and therefore we offer you a choice." The president of the United Terran Council, a weathered man named Harrison Cole, stepped forward with the dignity that his position demanded, and his voice carried the weight of 8 billion souls when he asked, "What choice do you offer us?" Cathril's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement in his alien features, and he raised one clawed hand toward the ceiling. "Toward the stars beyond, submit to the Dominion," he said. "Serve us as your masters, provide us with your resources and your labor, and you will be permitted to exist under our protection. Or," and here his voice dropped to something cold and terrible, "refuse, and face the cleansing that awaits all who stand against the Dominion." Silence filled the chamber, heavy and suffocating, and Elena watched as fear rippled through the human delegates like wind through wheat. And she understood their terror, because the Valori fleet that waited beyond their solar system numbered in the millions. And humanity had never faced anything like this before. But Elena also remembered something else. She remembered the trenches of ancient wars, the mushroom clouds that had once threatened to end everything, the plagues and famines and countless conflicts that had forged humanity into what it was today. And she remembered that her species had survived not because they were peaceful, but because they had learned to be dangerous. President Cole turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the question that he could not ask aloud. And she gave him a single nod. The president straightened his shoulders and faced Kethril with a calm that surprised even himself. "We require time to consider your generous offer," he said, and his voice did not waver. "Please return to your vessel, and we will send our response within 1 standard day." Kethril studied the human for a long moment, and something shifted in his alien expression. Though whether it was contempt or curiosity, no one could tell. "You have your day," he said finally. "But understand this, little creatures. In 10,000 years, no species has ever refused the Dominion, and the few who tried to resist are now nothing but dust of memory." He turned and walked away, his armored feet echoing against the marble floor. And when he and his delegation vanished in columns of light, The chamber erupted into chaos. Voices shouted over each other, some calling for surrender and others demanding defiance, and Elena stood apart from it all, her mind already racing through the calculations that would determine the fate of her species. President Cole appeared beside her, his face pale but his voice steady. "Tell me the truth, Admiral," he said quietly. "Can we fight them?" Elena turned to face him, and a smile crossed her features that held no warmth, only the cold promise of violence long restrained. "Mr. President," she said, "for 200 years, we have been preparing for exactly this moment, and we have built weapons that would make our ancestors weep with terror. And we have trained soldiers who know nothing but war. And we have waited in silence while the galaxy forgot that humanity was ever dangerous." She gestured toward the window, toward the alien ship that hung above their world like a guillotine blade. "They think we are afraid," she continued. "They think we will kneel because every other species has kneeled before them. But they do not know us, and they do not know what we have become." The president swallowed hard, and his next words came out barely above a whisper. "What do we tell them?" Elena reached into her pocket and withdrew a data chip, and she pressed it into his hand with the gravity of a priest offering communion. "We send them this," she said. "Coordinates to the edge of our system, a countdown of 72 hours, and 7 words that will seal their fate." He looked at the chip, then back in her face. "What 7 words?" Admiral Elena Vasquez turned toward the stars, and her voice carried the weight of all humanity's wars, all its suffering, all its rage compressed into a single moment of absolute certainty. "Leave our system. You will not return." 24 hours later, the message was sent, and across the void of space, aboard his flagship, Ambassador Catherall received it, and he laughed. He laughed because in 10,000 years, no prey had ever dared to threaten the hunters. And he laughed because these humans were either insane or stupid. And he laughed because he did not yet understand that humanity had never been prey. He ordered the Third Fleet to mobilize 4,000 warships crewed by millions of Valori warriors. And he sent word to the High Council that Earth would be cleansed within the week. The countdown began, and somewhere deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a bunker that no satellite could detect, Admiral Vasquez watched the alien fleet begin its approach. And she smiled the smile of a wolf that had finally tired of wearing sheep's clothing. "They made their choice," she whispered to the darkness. "Now we make ours." 3 weeks passed like a held breath, and the Valori Third Fleet crossed the boundary of the Sol system with all the confidence of conquerors who had never known defeat. Fleet Commander Zorath stood at the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Dominion, and watched the distant sun grow larger in the viewscreen as his 4,000 warships carved their path through the darkness. And his 4 eyes gleamed with anticipation for the slaughter to come. "Commander," said his tactical officer, a younger Valori named Thresh, "we are detecting no defensive structures, no orbital platforms, no military satellites, and the human homeworld appears completely unprotected." Zorath clicked his mandibles in what passed for a smile among his kind. "Of course they are unprotected," he said. "They are primitives who have barely learned to leave their own world. And Ambassador Catherall has informed me that they possess no weapons capable of threatening even our smallest vessels." He turned to face his bridge crew, his armored form casting long shadows in the dim light of the command center. "This will not be a battle," he declared. "This will be an execution." The fleet passed Neptune, and still there was nothing but silence from the human defenders. And Zorath began to feel something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not fear, for he had never learned that emotion, but rather a strange discomfort that he could not name. His chief advisor, an ancient Valori named Morthek, who had served in 100 campaigns, approached him with caution in his movements. "Commander," Morthek said, his voice carrying the weight of his many years. "I must speak words that you may not wish to hear." Zorath turned his gaze upon the old warrior, and his eyes narrowed with impatience. "Speak," Morthic gestured toward the viewscreen, toward the silent stars and the quiet world that waited in the distance. "In my long life, I have seen many species face the Dominion," he said. "Some have begged for mercy, and some have fought with desperate courage, and some have tried to flee into the void, but never, in all my years, have I seen a species that simply waits in silence." He paused, and his ancient eyes held something that looked almost like fear. "Prey that does not flee is not prey, Commander, and it is predator." Zorath's mandibles clicked with anger, and he turned away from his advisor with contempt. "You have grown old and foolish, Morthic," he said. "These humans are nothing but frightened animals who have accepted their fate. And their silence is not confidence, it is surrender." But even as he spoke the words, he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The fleet passed Uranus, and then Saturn with its beautiful rings, and still the humans made no move to defend themselves. And the silence grew heavier with every passing hour, and even the most battle-hardened warriors began to whisper among themselves. Then, as the fleet approached Jupiter, they appeared. Thousands of small drones emerged from the ice moons of the gas giant, rising from hidden bases that no scanner had ever detected. And they surrounded the Valori fleet like a swarm of metal insects or wraiths. Tactical officer studied the readings with confusion on his face. "Commander, the drones are not armed," he reported. "They carry no weapons, and they make no hostile movements. And they appear to be equipped with only recording devices." "Recording devices?" Zorath repeated, and now the feeling in his chest had grown stronger, and he realized with sudden clarity what it was. It was doubt. The drones circled his fleet, their sensors watching, their cameras recording, and they made no attempt to attack or to flee, and they simply observed as if they were witnesses to something that had not yet happened. Then, the transmission came at broadcast on every frequency, in every language that the Valori had ever encountered. And the voice that spoke was human, and it was calm. And it was cold. "This is your final mercy," the voice said. "Turn back now, and you will be permitted to leave our system in peace. And we will forget this insult to our sovereignty. And we will allow you to return to your masters with your lives." The voice paused, and when it continued, it carried a weight that made even Zorath's hearts beat faster. "Cross the orbit of Mars, and no mercy will be given, and no surrender will be accepted. And your fleet will become a lesson that the galaxy will never forget." Silence followed the transmission, and every eye on every bridge and every ship of the Third Fleet turned toward Commander Zorath, and they waited for his response. As Zorath stared at the viewscreen for a long moment, and his mind raced with calculations and possibilities, and for just one heartbeat, he considered the unthinkable. He considered retreat then. Pride and anger and 10,000 years of Valori supremacy drowned the thought in fire. He opened a channel to the entire Dominion, to the High Council and the homeworld and every subject species that lived under Valori rule. And he made sure that his next words would be heard by billions. "Behold the arrogance of these pathetic creatures," he roared. "They dare to threaten the Dominion with their toys and their empty words. And I will show the galaxy what happens to species that forget their place." He turned to his weapons officer with fury burning in his eyes. "Destroy the drones," he commanded. "Every single one of them." The officer hesitated for just a moment, and Zorath could see the fear in his subordinate's eyes. And that fear only made his rage burn hotter. Now, the weapons officer obeyed, and the Valori fleet opened fire. And 10,000 drones died in flowers of flame and shattered metal. And their recording devices transmitted until the very last second and somewhere far away. Human eyes watched every moment of their destruction's earth. broadcast one final message to the Sol system. "We are coming for you. Humans," he said, "and when we are finished, your world will be a tomb, and your species will be a memory, and your name will be spoken only as a warning to others who might dream of defiance." He cut the transmission and ordered the fleet to accelerate deep beneath the surface of Earth. In the bunker called the Cradle, Admiral Elena Vasquez watched the drones die on her screen, and she heard Zorith's threat echo through the speakers. And her face showed no emotion at all. Around her stood the commanders of humanity's secret military, men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. And they watched their admiral with steady eyes and steady hands. "They crossed the line," said Commander Chun. His voice barely above a whisper. Elena nodded slowly, and she reached for the control panel before her, and her fingers hovered over a single button that glowed with soft red light. "Project Prometheus," she said, and the words fell like stones into still water. "Activation sequence authorized." She pressed the button, and across the solar system, in places that the Valori had never suspected, in dimensions that their science had never discovered, something ancient and terrible began to wake. The countdown reached the zero. Humanity's judgment was about to fall. The Valori Third Fleet crossed the orbit of Mars with the certainty of 10,000 years of conquest behind them. And Commander Zorith allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as the blue marble of Earth grew larger in his view screen. "All ships report ready for bombardment," his tactical officer announced. "We can begin the cleansing within the hour." Zorith opened his mandibles to give the order, but the words never came. The stars went wrong. There was no other way to describe what happened next. And even the most experienced warriors on the Valori ships would struggle to find words for the horror that unfolded before their eyes. And in the span of a single heartbeat, the universe itself seemed to break apart. Space folded in the center of the Valori formation, where 300 ships flew in perfect formation. Reality simply collapsed inward like paper crushed in a giant fist. And the screams of dying crews cut through every communication channel as their vessels were compressed into points of light smaller than grains of sand. "What is happening?" Zorith roared, his claws digging into his command chair as his flagship shuddered with the force of the gravitational distortion. No one could answer him, because no one understood what they were seeing. The humans called them fold bombs. Weapons that humanity had designed in secret laboratories, hidden beneath dead moons and empty asteroids. Weapons that manipulated the fabric of space-time itself. And they detonated across the Valori fleet like seeds of destruction, blooming into flowers of impossible geometry. 500 ships died in the first 30 seconds, but that was only the beginning. From nowhere, from the empty void where nothing had existed moments before, new ships appeared. And Zorith's blood turned to ice as he watched them phase into reality like ghosts becoming solid. Thousands of them, tens of thousands of them. The Ghost Fleet had arrived for 2 centuries. Humanity had built warships in parallel dimensions, in places where no scanner could detect them and no spy could find them. And they had waited in the spaces between realities for the moment when they would be needed. And now that moment had come. Fire! Zorith screamed. "All ships, fire at will." The Valori fleet responded with everything they had, and beams of energy and missiles and kinetic projectiles filled the void with deadly light. And for a moment, it seemed like the humans would be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of firepower. But the Ghost ships did not fight like any enemy the Valori had ever faced. They phased in and out of reality, appearing long enough to fire their weapons and then vanishing before the return fire could touch them. And they moved through the Valori formation like wolves among sheep. And every shot they fired found its target with perfect accuracy. Zorith watched as the Dominion's finest warships were torn apart around him. And he saw warriors who had conquered 100 worlds die in flames and vacuum. And he understood at last what old Morthic had tried to tell him these humans were not prey, they had never been prey, they were something far worse. They were patient predators who had hidden their claws until the perfect moment to strike. "Commander," his communications officer shouted, "I'm receiving a transmission from the human homeworld." "Put it through." A face appeared on the view screen, and Zorath found himself looking at a human woman with dark skin and silver hair. And her eyes held the cold certainty of absolute victory. "I am Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Terran Defense Force," she said. "And you are dying." Zorath's rage boiled over, and he slammed his fist against his console. "You think this changes anything?" he roared. "The Dominion has millions of ships. We will return with such force that your world will burn for 1,000 years. The human admiral smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "No," she said simply. "You will not." Behind her, holographic displays showed the battle from every angle, showed the Valori fleet being systematically destroyed, showed the ghost ships dancing through space with deadly grace. "Your third fleet will be remembered as a lesson," Vasquez continued. "A reminder to your masters of what happens when they threaten the people of Earth." Zorath's flagship shuddered as something struck its shields, and alarms began to wail throughout the bridge. "We have survived ice ages that killed 90% of all life on our world," Vasquez said. "We have survived plagues that killed half our population. And we have survived world wars that nearly destroyed our civilization. And we have survived ourselves." Another impact, and Zorath heard the sound of metal tearing somewhere deep in his ship. "You are not the first enemy we have faced," the Admiral continued, "and you will not be the last. But you will serve as a message to all who come after." The view screen flickered as power systems began to fail. "Earth remembers everything," Vasquez said, and her voice was cold and hard and final. "And Earth forgives nothing." The transmission ended. Zorath stood alone on his dying bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his crew and the wreckage of his command. And he watched through cracked view screens as the last of his fleet was torn apart by weapons that should not exist in 11 minutes. 4,000 Valori warships had been reduced to debris. He activated the emergency beacon, and he began to record his final message to the High Council. "This is Commander Zorath of the Third Fleet," he said, and his voice cracked with something he had never felt before: fear. "We have been defeated, and our fleet has been destroyed. And I die now with the knowledge that we were wrong about these creatures." He paused as another explosion shook his ship. "They were never afraid of us," he continued. "They were waiting for us, and they have weapons beyond anything we have ever imagined. And they are coming for the Dominion." The hull began to breach, and Zorath felt the cold vacuum of space reaching for him. "Do not send more fleets," he said with his final breath. "Do not provoke them and do not threaten them, because they are not what we thought they were." The transmission cut out as the endless Dominion came apart in a bloom of fire and twisted metal silence. Returned to the Sol system in the aftermath of the battle. Human salvage crews moved through the debris field, collecting wreckage and bodies and data from the destroyed Valori ships. And Admiral Vasquez watched their work from her command center with satisfaction. "Send the message," she ordered. A new transmission went out on all Dominion frequencies, broadcasting to every corner of their vast empire. "Your fleet is gone," the message said. 4,000 of your finest warships have been destroyed in 11 minutes, and we have suffered no casualties. And we stand ready to do the same to any force you send against us." The message paused. "But we are not monsters. And we do not wish for war, and we offer you this one chance. Leave us in peace, and we will leave you in peace." Another pause. Attached to this message is a data packet containing detailed scans of every world in your Dominion, including your homeworld, and these scans were taken by ships that you never detected. Ships that are still watching you even now. The final words fell like hammer blows. We know where you live. And we can reach you whenever we choose. And we are giving you one chance to make the right decision. Do not waste it. Across the galaxy. In the throne room of the Valori High Council, the ancient rulers of the Dominion listened to the human message. And they saw the scans of their own homeworld taken from impossible distances. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they knew what it felt like to be prey. 6 months after the destruction of the Third Fleet, the Valori Dominion began to crumble from within. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. And on 1,000 conquered worlds, enslaved species watched the recordings of ghost ships tearing through Valori warships. And they began to remember what hope felt like rebellion ignited on Korath Prime, where the insectoid Korethi had served the Dominion for 3,000 years. And they rose up against their masters with improvised weapons and desperate courage. And when the Valori sent ships to crush them, they found that the Korethi had learned to fight on Desser 4. The reptilian Desserans seized control of the orbital shipyards and declared their world free. And when the Dominion fleet arrived to punish them, they discovered that human weapons had somehow found their way into Desseran hands. World after world erupted in violence, and the iron grip of the Valori began to slip. And in the great throne room of their homeworld, the High Council gathered to decide the fate of their empire. 12 elders sat in a circle of obsidian thrones, their ancient bodies bent with age, but their eyes still sharp with the cruelty of 10,000 years. And at their center stood Ambassador Kethrol, who had been the first to meet the humans and the first to underestimate them. We must respond with overwhelming force, roared Elder Vexeth, his mandibles clicking with fury. We will gather every ship in the Dominion, 100,000 vessels, and we will burn Earth to ash and salt the ruins so that nothing ever grows there again. Several of the elders nodded in agreement, their ancient hatred burning bright. But Elder Morthax, the oldest and most cautious of the council, raised one withered hand for silence. We have all seen the recordings, he said, his voice creaking like ancient wood. The humans destroyed 4,000 ships in 11 minutes, and they claim to have weapons we cannot imagine. And they have proven that they can reach our homeworld without detection. He turned his milky eyes toward Vexeth. If we send 100,000 ships, and they are destroyed as easily as the Third Fleet, what then? The rebellion that spreads through our empire will become a wildfire, and the Dominion will fall not to human weapons, but to our own subjects. The council fell into bitter argument, voices rising and falling like waves in a storm. And Kethrol stood silent in their midst with his thoughts churning like poison in his mind. Remembered standing before the humans in their meeting hall. Remembered the arrogance with which he had delivered his ultimatum. Remembered how small and weak they had seemed. And he remembered the human admiral's smile as she told him that Earth forgives nothing. Then the impossible happened in the center of the throne room, where no being could enter without passing through 100 checkpoints and 1,000 guards. A pillar of light appeared, and from that light stepped a single human male. The guards raised their weapons, but the human raised one empty hand in a gesture of peace. My name is Commander James Okonkwo, he said, and his voice was calm and steady, and I come bearing a message from the people of Earth. Chaos erupted as guards rushed forward. But before they could reach him, the human touched the device on his wrist, and they froze in place as if time itself had stopped around them. The elders stared in horror at their immobilized guards, and Commander Okonkwo walked past them without concern, his boots echoing against the stone floor. Your guards are unharmed, he said. They are simply experiencing a localized temporal field that has slowed their perception of time to approximately 1 second per hour, and they will return to normal when I leave. He stopped before the circle of thrones and looked up at the ancient rulers of the Dominion with no fear in his eyes. "I am here to offer you a choice," he continued. "The same choice that my people offered you 6 months ago. And the same choice that you rejected when you sent your fleet to destroy us." Elder Vexeth leaned forward, his rage barely contained. "You dare come here?" he hissed. "You dare enter our sacred throne room and threaten us?" Okonkwo shook his head slowly. "I do not threaten," he said. "I inform and I offer. And I ask you to consider carefully before you respond." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small data crystal, and he placed it on the floor before the elders. "This contains our terms for peace," he said. "They are simple. Release all conquered species. Abolish the institution of slavery throughout your empire. And join the galactic community as equals rather than as tyrants." He paused. "In exchange, humanity will share its technology with you, will help you transition to a peaceful society, and will defend your worlds against any who might seek revenge for your past crimes." Silence hung in the throne room like a held breath. "But know this," Okonkwo continued, and his voice hardened. "If you choose war, if you send another fleet against Earth, we will not simply defend ourselves, and we will dismantle your empire system by system, and we will free every species you have ever enslaved, and we will hunt your kind to the edges of the galaxy." He looked each elder in the eyes. "One by one, you have 3 days to decide." The pillar of light appeared again, and Commander Okonkwo stepped toward it. But before he vanished, he turned back with one final message. "My ancestors were once slaves too," he said quietly. "And they were told that they were weak, and they were told that they would never be free, and they were told that their masters were too powerful to resist. But they fought anyway, and they won anyway. And now their children walk among the stars." He smiled. "Think carefully about which side of history you want to stand on." The light consumed him, and he was gone. The temporal field released the guards, who stumbled forward in confusion, and the elders sat in stunned silence. And the fate of the galaxy hung upon their decision for 3 days. The council debated, and the arguments grew more heated with each passing hour. And half the elders demanded war, while half pleaded for peace. Ambassador Kethrol said nothing during these debates, and he sat in silence and watched his fellow elders tear at each other with words and threats. And he thought about the human who had walked into their throne room as if he owned it, thought about the recordings of the Third Fleet's destruction. He thought about the rebellion spreading across the empire, and on the final day, when the vote was called, the council found itself evenly divided, 6 for war and 6 for peace. All eyes turned to Kethrol, the 13th voice, the deciding vote. He rose slowly from his seat, and his ancient joints creaked with the effort, and every being in the throne room held their breath as they waited for his words. "I was the first of us to meet the humans," he said, and his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. "I looked into their eyes and saw only weakness, and I told them that they would kneel or die, and I laughed when they sent their warning." He paused. "I was wrong." Hope flickered in the eyes of those who sought peace. But Kethrol continued, and his voice hardened. "The Dominion has ruled for 10,000 years, and we have conquered 10,000 worlds, and we have never bent the knee to any species, and we will not start now." He raised his chin with ancient pride. "I vote for war." The throne room erupted, and those who had sought peace cried out in despair, and those who had sought war roared with triumph. And Elder Vexeth immediately began issuing orders for the greatest fleet ever assembled. Commander Okonkwo received word of the decision within the hour. He transmitted the news to Earth with a simple message. "They chose poorly." Admiral Vasquez read his words and nodded slowly, and she turned to her officers with eyes that held no mercy. "Begin Operation Judgment." she said. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when humanity stops being patient. The final war had begun. 1 year after Ambassador Kethril cast his vote for war, the largest fleet in galactic history descended upon the Sol System. 100,000 Valori warships filled the void like a plague of metal locusts, and their numbers were so great that they blocked out the stars themselves. And Commander Zurhath's words had been forgotten in the fury of wounded pride. And the Dominion had convinced itself that sheer numbers would overwhelm whatever tricks the humans possessed. Elder Vexeth commanded the armada from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and he broadcast his arrival to the human homeworld with the certainty of a god pronouncing judgment. Behold the might of the Valori. He roared, 100,000 ships have come to answer your insult, and when we are finished, your world will be a graveyard, and your species will be a cautionary tale told to frightened children. Earth did not respond with words. Earth responded with fire. The Ghost Fleet emerged from dimensional space in numbers that dwarfed even the Valori armada, and full bombs detonated throughout the enemy formation. And the battle that followed would be remembered for 10,000 years as the moment when the old order died. But humanity did not simply defend, even as the Ghost Fleet engaged the Valori armada. Human strike teams launched attacks across the galaxy, and shipyards burned on 100 Dominion worlds, and supply lines were severed, and military installations were destroyed by weapons that appeared from nowhere and vanished without a trace. Admiral Elena Vasquez commanded the defense of Earth from her flagship, the Terran Resolve, and she watched the battle unfold on holographic displays that showed her everything. Every ship, every missile, every death. All squadrons advance, she ordered. And her voice was calm despite the chaos of battle. It's time to end this. The Terran Resolve led the charge into the heart of the Valori formation, and human soldiers in powered exoskeletons launched boarding actions against enemy command vessels. And neural combat links allowed them to fight with speed and precision that no Valori warrior could match on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Elder Vexeth watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. This is impossible, he screamed. They are only humans. They are insects. But his screams changed nothing, and ship after ship fell to human weapons. And the great armada that was supposed to crush Earth forever was being systematically destroyed. Then the Terran Resolve locked onto the Eternal Dominion, and Admiral Vasquez gave the order to board. Human Marines cut through the flagship's hull like a knife through paper, and they fought their way through corridors filled with Valori warriors, and they left nothing alive in their wake. And at the head of this assault was Admiral Vasquez herself. Her powered armor stained with alien blood, she found Elder Vexeth on his bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his guards. And he stood alone with a ceremonial blade in his trembling hands. You cannot do this, he said, and his voice cracked with fear. The Dominion has ruled for 10,000 years. We are eternal? Vasquez removed her helmet and faced him with cold eyes. Nothing is eternal, she said. Empires rise and empires fall, and the Dominion's time has ended. She drew her sidearm and pointed it at his chest. But I will give you one chance, she continued. Surrender. Order your remaining ships to stand down, and I will let you live to see the galaxy you built burn around you. Vexeth's mandibles clicked with the last remnants of his pride. I would rather die than surrender to insects, he spat. Vasquez shrugged. That can be arranged. She did not shoot him. Instead, she stepped aside, and behind her stood Commander James Okonkwo and a squad of human soldiers. And with them were representatives of every species the Dominion had ever conquered, Korithi and Esserons and a dozen others. All armed, all watching Vexeth with hatred in their eyes. These are the people you enslaved, Vasquez said, and they have traveled a very long way to meet you. She turned and walked away. What happened next was not recorded in any official history. But when it was over, Elder Vexith was no longer breathing, and the former slaves stood over his body with something like peace in their eyes. The Battle of Sol ended 6 hours after it began of the 100,000 Valori ships. Only 3,000 survived to surrender, and the rest were scattered across the void as debris and memory. And the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen had been broken against humanity's resolve, but the war was not won with one battle in the months that followed. Human fleets appeared above Valori worlds and offered a simple choice: surrender and be treated with mercy, or resist and be destroyed. And world after world chose surrender. And the empire that had lasted 10,000 years collapsed in less than a year. Ambassador Kethril was captured on the Dominion homeworld, and he was brought before Admiral Vasquez in chains. And when he looked into her eyes, he saw no hatred, only a terrible patience. "I gave you a warning," she said quietly. "I gave you every chance to walk away, and you chose to ignore me." Kethril's shoulders slumped with defeat. "We did not believe," he said. "We could not believe, and 10,000 years of conquest had taught us that the strong rule and the weak serve. And we could not imagine that a species so young could be so powerful." Vasquez nodded slowly. "That was your mistake," she said. "You saw our youth and thought it meant weakness. But we are young because we were forged in fire. And every generation of humanity has faced extinction and survived. And we have learned lessons that your ancient empire never had to learn." She leaned closer. "We learned that strength is not enough," she said. "We learned that cruelty breeds revenge, and tyranny breeds rebellion. And empires built on suffering always fall in the end." She straightened and gestured to the guards. "You will spend the rest of your life watching the galaxy you built be torn down and replaced with something better," she said. "And maybe, if you live long enough, you will understand why. The Terran Accords were signed on the anniversary of humanity's first contact with the Valori, and representatives from 1,000 species gathered on Earth to witness the birth of a new galactic order. There would be no more empires, no more conquest, no more slavery. Humanity did not claim dominion over the stars, and instead they established the Terran Accords as a framework for cooperation and mutual defense. And they offered their technology and their protection to any species that wished to join them. The former slaves of the Dominion found homes on worlds that had once belonged to their masters, and human aid workers helped them build new lives from the ashes of the old order. And the galaxy began to heal 5 years after the war ended. A young Valori girl named Vesha stood on a hillside on a liberated world, and she looked up at the night sky with wonder in her 4 eyes. She had been born into slavery, and she had expected to die in slavery, and instead she was free. A human woman knelt beside her, a relief worker named Sarah, who had come from Earth to help rebuild what the Dominion had destroyed. "What do you see?" Sarah asked gently. Vesha pointed at the stars. "I see lights," she said. "So many lights, and my mother told me that each one is a sun with worlds around it. And people living on those worlds." Sarah smiled. "That's right." Vesha turned to look at her with curiosity. "My mother also told me that your people saved us," she said. "That you came from the stars and broke our chains and set us free. And she told me that your people were once slaves too, long ago. And that is why you understood." Sarah's smile softened with memory. "That's also right," she said. "A long time ago, humans did terrible things to each other, and we learned how much suffering cruelty can cause. And we promised ourselves that we would never stand by while others suffered the same way." Vesha looked back at the stars. "What happens now?" she asked. Sarah put her arm around the young girl's shoulders. "Now we build something new," she said. "Something better. And we make sure that what happened to your people never happens to anyone else." Vesha was quiet for a long moment. "The sky looks different now," she finally said. Before, when I looked up, I only saw the ships of our masters waiting to hurt us. But now, she paused, searching for the right words. Now the sky feels like it belongs to everyone. Sarah squeezed her shoulder gently. It does, she said. The sky belongs to everyone now. They sat together in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, and somewhere among those distant lights, humanity continued its work, building, healing, protecting, and making sure that the galaxy would never forget the lesson that Earth had taught it: speak softly, carry a big stick, and never, ever ignore the final warning, the end.